Michael Shellenberger is a Time Magazine Hero of the Environment, Green Book Award winner, and the best-selling author of San Fransicko, Why Progressive Ruins Cities, and the other one is Apocalypse Never, Why Environmental Alarmism Hurts Us All. He's been called an environmental guru, climate guru, North America's leading public intellectual on clean energy, and high priest of the pro-human environmental environment for his work, and influential. He is I have known of his name for some time because some time ago there appeared a book, a website by called Breakthrough that was techno-optimist about environmentalism by Ted Nordhaus and Michael Shellenberger. Schellenberger was slightly younger and had more hair than Ted Nordhaus, who we do also know, by the way. That doesn't reflect discredit on us, is it? And we've been to a couple of there are things but Schellenberger first developed more of a passion for atomic energy, which, if you bury the radiation stuff, is a lot less harmful than the others. But a lot of the left reacts to the fact that uranium atoms split the same way Victorians reacted the way babies are made, and they didn't want to hear about it. And so in more recent, his interest has moved on to urban life and especially the issue of the homeless and he has developed a passion to that. He has been a climate and environmental activist for over 30 years. He has helped save nuclear active worldwide, from Illinois and New York to South Korea, Taiwan, therefore preventing an increase in air pollution equivalent to adding 24 million cars to the road. And helped save America's last unprotected ancient redwood forest, helped Nike improve factory conditions, and a new Apollo project in clean energy. And I think he was in the side of the people who helped save Diablo Canyon, the last nuclear power plant that's actually working in California. So we would like to welcome Dr. Michael Shellenberger to address us.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you very much. It's very sweet to be here. Really nice to be here. Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Roberta, for making this happen. It's a pleasure. And thank you all for coming. I already had a chance to meet one of my heroes, Aaron Cariati, who wonderful psychiatrist who stood up against the restrictive COVID restrictions. And we thank you for your courage on it and for speaking out and sacrifice significantly for it. But I'm sure you're in a better place and happier place now. So really wonderful to meet you. And it's wonderful to be here. So my own journey on this issue began after Apocalypse Never. I was getting ready to go on book tour and save nuclear plants around the world, and then COVID hit. And it was very disorienting, as all of you can remember, especially if you were planning on doing travel during that period, you were grounded at home. And I found myself, I guess I would say, sad about it. I don't want to, I've been teaching myself not to say depressed. I'm going to reserve that for people suffering clinical levels of depression. But I found myself Sort of disoriented, not sure what to do, and the book came out. We sold a bunch of copies. That gives you a chance to do another book. And I knew that I wanted to finally write on this question of what do we call homelessness? What is this issue that we call homelessness in California? What's it really about? And around the same period, I was starting to watch these old YouTube videos of Viktor Frankl. I'm curious how many people remember, or raise your hand if you know Viktor Frankl. This is I was sort of raised on this book, Man's Search for Meaning. He's this famous Austrian psychiatrist, gets sent off to the death camps, sent to Auschwitz, separated from his wife and his parents. And the Nazis, when they took his coat, he had his book manuscript in the coat. He lost the book he was working on. And so he used that, but then he used that experience of surviving the death camps to construct this beautiful new positive psychology that he would call peak psychology, because so much of psychology had been depth psychology focused on how to overcome bad things as opposed to how to achieve beautiful or great things, how to make yourself a bigger person. And I had a couple of funny experiences. The first was I could watch 2 minutes of a Viktor Frankl video and immediately feel happier. It was the craziest thing. It was, we give it this name, cognitive behavioral therapy, where you talk back to your negative stories, of which there's basically just 3. I'm a bad person, the world's a bad place, the future is dark. Those 3 storylines, by the way, are the 3 storylines of apocalyptic environmentalism. That was one of the insights of the book I did, Breakthrough, in 2007, was that apocalyptic environmentalism is, in the nature of the stories it tells, depressing. So there's something about the stories that we tell, the mentality that shapes our feelings and our emotions and moods. But the other thing he said, which was something I needed at the time, which was that everybody needs to have a goal. You know, we say purpose, but you need to have something you're trying to do. And some of us need it more than others. And I really needed that. And so I decided to do this book, San Fransicko. But ultimately, for me, this book was important because my view was, and increasingly came to be, that the folks on the street that we see in the tents, that are often in psychotic states, that appear mentally ill, on addiction, do not have free will, that they're not actually in control of their lives in the way that any of us might be said to be. And I was aware that folks on the street suffered disproportionately from mental illness and drug addiction. It was something I knew because my parents were psychologists. We came to San Francisco when I was 15. I would say to my parents, what's wrong with this person on the street? And they say they're mentally ill, just like your aunt. My aunt had schizophrenia. When we were kids, she would tell stories about how she knew President Kennedy, how they were communicating to her through the television set, and I learned what psychosis was from my parents. So it wasn't unfamiliar to me, and then I moved to San Francisco in 1993, and I worked across the street from I would later come to call an open drug scene. Open drug scenes are open-air drug dealing areas, open-air drug markets, but the addicts who buy from there are so addicted that as soon as they bought their heroin, they would use it right there, and they would end up camping there and living there. So that's what an open drug scene is. But even because I'm a huge advocate for housing. I mean, I think we all think we need more housing in California. Everybody thinks we need more housing. Maybe not in your neighborhood, but most of us think we do need, if we're going to realize our potential as a state, we need more housing. So I myself was sort of swept up in this idea that we could solve this homeless problem with more housing. I wrote an essay for Forbes in 2019, sort of making this case, and a bunch of people reminded me that the folks on the street have other problems than just being able to afford the rent. So we started this journey to work on this book, and one of the first things I did is I just went on to Google Scholar, and I Googled open-air drug dealing, because I knew that was a big part of it. And I discovered a paper that had been published, I think in 2018, called Open Drug Scenes, The Experience of 5 European Cities. this is a wonderful study that was done. It was commissioned by the Norwegian government to understand how various European cities had dealt with what we call open drug scenes. But the first thing that struck me when I read the paper is they were describing an open drug scene, and I said, well, that's a homeless encampment. Literally, what they're describing is what we call a homeless encampment. And that was one of the first hints I had that this word homelessness is really a propaganda word. It's a word, and when I say propaganda, what I mean is that language is so powerful that when you say that word, your brain is instantly in a way of thinking that this is a housing problem, fundamentally. And I've been ambivalent about even using the word. Sometimes I just want to say, I'm not talking about housing or homelessness, I'm just talking about the street addiction and untreated mental illness crisis. You know, we had a chance to visit the Village of Hope earlier, and they mentioned that some of the folks that are there are women escaping an abusive husband with their kids. Those women definitely need our support, but they're also the easiest population to take care of. Women who do not have any underlying drug addiction or psychiatric disorder, those are the easiest folks to take care of. The folks that we see living on the street are overwhelmingly on the street because they are not taking their meds, and or they become so addicted to drugs that they have been kicked out of the homes of their family and friends. So I have 3 friends from high school that became homeless addicts. 2 are dead. Watching them, and any of you have addiction in the family, you know that the parents in particular, it's heartbreaking because your child's addicted, they're stealing from you, they're lying to you, they'll do anything to support their addiction. So what do? Do you maintain their addiction, or do you kick them out? And there's not a right or wrong answer to that. That's a problem. But the people we see on the streets are the people who have been kicked out of their friends' and families' homes after couch surfing, and their addiction has led them to be on the streets. So what do you do about this? Well, going back to our paper on the European drug scenes, this was a paper that looked at Amsterdam, Lisbon, Vienna, Zurich, and Amsterdam. Did I already say Amsterdam? Yeah. So then there's one missing. Amsterdam, Frankfurt, Lisbon, Vienna, Zurich.
No, Frankfurt.
Yeah, I left out Frankfurt. And it's basically the same in every country, which is that there's a political argument between what we might call liberals and conservatives. You might say between harm reduction and tough love people. And they all finally decide that they're not going to allow people to camp outside and use drugs publicly and have open air drug dealing in their neighborhoods. They're just not going to allow that. And it's usually some sort of a political alliance of local residents and some psychiatrists and nurses who think that actually you're enabling this illness by allowing people to continue to live outside. And they use various methods, but basically in every situation it's the same. You don't allow people to live outside and camp out. You don't allow open air drug dealing. You do allow for prescription methadone, or we now have Suboxone, which is a drug replacement, a temporary replacement for heroin or fentanyl addiction. And these were all countries that only had to deal with heroin. So a caveat with that, they did not have to deal with the methamphetamine crisis. Most of you may know that we're in the midst of really 2 significant drug crises around fentanyl and meth. The people I interview on the streets are mostly smoking both fentanyl and meth at this point. They're smoking the meth with the fentanyl so that they can stay awake and enjoy the high. There's very little heroin on the streets in many parts of California. It's really taken over by fentanyl and meth because the cost is so much lower. The concentration, of course, fentanyl is 50 to 100 times stronger than heroin. So, but they didn't have to deal with that, but nonetheless, they provide a kind of a case study that you shut it down, you allow for methadone and Suboxone, you get people into treatment, and then into recovery to overcome their addictions. Pretty straightforward. I then had a chance, I was in Amsterdam making the case for nuclear power in 2018, And I was with this a member of parliament who's now the Attorney General of the Netherlands, probably going to be the next prime minister. And she said, "You may be interested in my husband, Rene. He's someone that works on homelessness issues. And I know it's a big issue in San Francisco." And Rene's this kind of tough guy. He looks like the actor Jason Statham. You guys know Lock, Stock, Smoking Barrel? I mean, looks identical to him, actually. Really kind of macho guy. And I said to him, Rene, why do we have so many people on the streets in the Bay Area? And he just said, he goes, you have to have, what do I say, carrots and sticks. You have to have carrots and sticks. You're just carrots in the Bay Area. It's just carrots, carrots, carrots. And that little piece of wisdom has basically run through the entire story. And Rene was actually just in town last night for the first time. We had a bunch of our allies up for dinner at our house, and we talked some more about it. And that, being able to have that carrot and stick in every single part of a person's journey out of homelessness and addiction into recovery is absolutely essential. We then discovered there's a very large body of research on something that's called contingency management. In Birmingham, Alabama, they took crack addicts in the 1980s. They said everybody needs to come off the street, you need to be in shelter. And one thing that a lot of people really want when they come off the street is they want their own private room. Imagine how you would want your own private room. Imagine having to share a big space with somebody, there's no privacy. It's the first thing most people want. So what they did in Birmingham is they said you can have your own private room in this shelter, but you have to pass a drug test. And so people would pass the drug test, they'd move up to their room. Some of them would, of course, relapse. Relapse, of course, is it's the rule, not the exception. They relapse and they go back to shelter. They don't go outside. They don't lose their ability to sleep inside, but they don't get their room. And they're told if you pass your drug test in the next month, then you can get your room back. That's called contingency management. And there's a lot of big fights between me and harm reduction advocates right now, but we can find some agreements on this thing called contingency management. The main George Soros think tank that advocates drug legalization, which is called the Drug Policy Alliance, they support contingency management as much as we do. So one little point of growth. So then the question comes to, well, if the method for treating addiction is basically three things: intervention, treatment, recovery, in that order. If we know what that is, why aren't we doing it? Why don't we have that model here in California and other parts of the United States? So the question suddenly turns to that. Is it because we don't have any money? Definitely not that reason. San Francisco spends about 10 times more per homeless person than the national average. So if there's a correlation between the money and homelessness, it's a positive correlation, not an inverse correlation. So is it lack of social services? Is it lack of social workers? In a sense, it is. Our coalition, we have two coalitions that we're working with. One is called the California Peace Coalition, focused on California. The other one is called North America Recovers. Both of our coalitions are very unique in that we've brought together different people that have often been on the opposite side of this issue. So we bring together residents who are fed up with the open drug scene near their homes, but then we also bring together the parents of the homeless addicts, really brave folks who are absolutely heartbroken because their kids are on the street and they can't do anything to rescue their kids. And we've also brought together recovering addicts who are the funniest people if you ever hang out with them. They're the masters of self-deprecation, people who have been through 12-step, been through recovery, and then some of the more evidence-based folks involved in drug treatment, psychiatric care. And we brought together this coalition to advocate for these three steps: intervention, treatment, recovery. So then the question is, why don't we have that? We do have a lot of nonprofit service providers. We do have that, but we can't seem to get consistent case management for addicts. So if you interview my friend Renee, the Jason Statham character from the Netherlands, he's actually a registered nurse who shut down the open-air drug scene in Amsterdam in the late 80s, and his experiences come from that. He'll point out that you need a caseworker for a person that's really there for them, and you have a continuity of care. Somebody comes into the shelter, or they go into psychiatric hospital, and they get an individualized or a personalized plan for recovery. And they get everybody involved in that. The caseworker, if there's some law that's been broken, the judge is involved. They get parents and family members involved. They might get a psychiatrist on that team, and they think of it as a team for that person that's going to really be with that person until they get out of recovery. We don't have that. We have a lot of nonprofits that keep applying for grants and getting grants, but it's nobody's job to take care of the people and really be assigned to them. So that's part of it. And by the way, the hardest people are the people that the nonprofits are the least likely to want to work with. The guy with schizophrenia and a methamphetamine habit living under the bridge. You know, many times you'll see homeless people and you'll see they have a lot of clothes on them, even a very hot day. They're wrapping themselves in a lot of clothes. That's one of the symptoms of schizophrenia. So when you see people wrapped in a lot of clothes like that, and without getting into too much detail, often not changing their clothes for a very long time, you know, and not using the bathroom in ways that are conducive to also wearing these as clothes. These are folks who are in absolute distress, and there is no civilized country in the world that allows their schizophrenic population to use methamphetamine and fentanyl and live under a bridge. It's just not allowed. And I mean it when I say there's no civilized country that allows that. We allow it because we're not a civilized country. That might be the first test that you're a civilized country. If you want to get at what upsets me and makes it hard for me to focus on this issue full-time, it's that we would treat folks this way. My aunt, I wanted to talk more about my aunt in San Francisco. I thought this would be something to bring into the book. And she was such a difficult person for my father and his sisters. They really didn't want to talk about it. She had a very good outcomes. She never lived on the street. She lived in a group home, you know, with I think 6 to 9 other people, caseworker on site, a common kitchen, common dining area. She smoked cigarettes and drank coffee all day long. It's a great outcome for somebody with very serious schizophrenia, who was diagnosed in the 50s and went through a lot of very bad medical treatments before we really understood how to treat this. The idea that you would be taking people that are in psychotic states who often think they're being persecuted by monsters or aliens and allow them to live in these degrading ways. The levels of sexual assault, in particular for women living on the street, approach 100%. I have yet to meet a woman who has lived on the street long periods of time who has not told me that she has been repeatedly victimized with sexual assault. I've been told by men that they have been repeatedly affected by sexual assault. So the situation on the streets is just as terrible as you might imagine. We only talk about how bad it is a little bit in my talks because it's just enough gives you a sense of how terrible it is. Every day that goes on, I consider it an immoral situation. I have seriously questioned also wanting to move out of the state because my taxes are going to something I think is very wrong. So we're out of the realm of lack of proper treatment into an area of active mistreatment of people with serious mental illness and with drug addiction, each of which requires something in particular that turns out to be very hard for the leaders of the state, and I think to some extent for the voters of the state, to deal with, which is the need for an intervention. It's the first of 3 parts towards recovery. It's intervention, treatment, and recovery. Everyone says they're open to treatment. Everyone says they're fine with that. Everyone says they're fine with recovery. We can't seem to get people's heads yet around the need for intervention. We're making progress, but it is essential that there be an intervention. We're having people overdose on fentanyl 6, 12, 18, 24 times. When you watch people get Narcaned, so we can revive them with this Narcan that goes up the nose, it immediately wakes them up, they go right back onto the street, and the first thing they do is smoke more fentanyl because they feel so terrible being off of it. People are smoking fentanyl all day long, every day, not moving. We had a woman with serious either schizophrenia or severe bipolar, it's impossible to ever diagnose on the street, where her legs rotted because they refused to take her in, and they brought her to the hospital, and her legs were amputated, and they put her back on the street. This is in San Francisco, 2023. Wow. This is happening today. I discovered many things. One time I was out walking right near the city hall in San Francisco, and we discovered that 3 men had put police barricades to take up a part of the street, not the sidewalk, the street, so they could be near the heat, the steam heat coming from the manhole covers. And they were surrounded by filth and waste, including excrement and needles. And the social worker I was with said, "Come on, we got to go. We got to get up and go." And one of the men said, "I can't, I have a broken hip." I didn't believe him. It's just, how could you possibly have a broken hip and be lying on the street in San Francisco? He had a broken hip, you know. Why did he have a broken hip? Well, he had been treated for it in the hospital, but he's so addicted he had to get out of the hospital so he could use fentanyl. A city worker drove by at that very moment and kind of rolled down his window, and we were like, he's got a broken hip. You know, you guys got to get him off the street. He's like, okay, yeah, he drives by. 1 week later, he was still on the street. And I know because somebody tweeted out a photo of him on the street. All of this is captured in various Twitter threads if you want to get lost in it. So this is happening, and so you have to kind of, what is going on? Why is this so difficult to get these folks off the streets? In San Francisco, I go through all of the reasons. There's a bit of jargon I'll use to describe how to think about the causality of this, which is the word overdetermined. Overdetermined it's a bit of jargon, but it's a very helpful word, which is that something has so many causes that explain it that you've over-explained it, so many different things. Voter attitudes, judges, laws, city councils, state legislators, it goes on and on. But what comes down to it, I think, is fundamentally an ideology. There's money involved, for sure. There's power, there's institutions. But there's really fundamentally a very powerful ideology which we might call victimhood ideology. It's a victimhood ideology. It's also what I would call wokeism. And it has a lot of different names, but the core idea is that you can divide people in the world into victims and oppressors. And when you've done that, that's all they are. They can't escape that. You're just a victim or you're an oppressor, and that's it. And to victims, everything should be given and nothing required. So once you're in the victim category, you maintain the victim status. We couldn't possibly, if somebody, so part of the challenge here, you go talk to somebody, interview the guy, many people living in garbage in a tent, and you say, hey, we got a room and a shelter for you, clean, change of clothes. Nope, I'm fine right here. I'm totally fine. I don't need to move. I'm fine. I've got a broken hip. So I don't move me. I'm fine right here if you could bring me food and drugs. That's what I want. And so San Francisco city government does that. We say to the extent to which we'll give them something, we'll give them free housing, but no conditions. We call that housing first. There's no conditions to the housing, even though we know that having the conditions is what actually helped people in Birmingham through contingency management to escape it. So this is, call it wokeism. This is, on the one hand, this is a continuation of the radical left. On the one hand, it's really nothing different from this than the kind of ideology that emerged out of the late 60s. There is some differences. I grew up in the 1980s. I come from the radical left. I went to Nicaragua in 1988 to help the socialist Sandinista revolution. My heroes were, gasp out of the side of the room. Holy cow. My heroes were Che Guevara, Nelson Mandela. So that's where this comes from. But Nelson Mandela and Che Guevara, these were stories of overcoming oppression, actually. So there was a change that went from, and I'm not defending that particular ideology, but there was some sense in which victims could overthrow the government and become powerful. That's a socialist revolutionary story. It's a Marxist story. Again, I'm not justifying it, but it just suggests something happened that's different from, that evolved from a story of overcoming. Remember, that was like one of the signature songs of the civil rights movement was "We Shall Overcome," to "You Shall Be a Victim Forever." And then married into sort of a really clear moral hierarchy. And in case nobody believed it was a moral hierarchy, recall that we went from just a few years ago, we would say people of color to refer to all non-white people, to a new category called BIPOC, just to make clear that there was a hierarchy within people of color. And the idea was that the people at the highest end of the hierarchy, we could objectively say had been more oppressed. And so Asians are really just not really people of color anymore, according to the woke hierarchy. So you can sort of see it gets really rigid over time, a really rigid moral hierarchy of wokeism. And so when you talk to folks about why can't we get this guy off the street because he's a victim of oppression, and to victims everything should be given and nothing required, think about how terrible we treated people with mental illness in the past, therefore we must let him lie on the street. That's it. I don't want to add anything else to it, because that's it in its purest form. And so the only way to, well, I'll say one more thing about this. The morality of wokeism evolves out of a over-prioritization on one value in particular, which is the value of care or of reducing harm. The psychologist Jonathan Haidt has done these and there's a whole field of very close studies of different human values. There's sort of freedom, care, I'm going to forget all of them. There's other value, orderliness, propriety, authority, loyalty, that are older traditional values that basically over time, for progressives on the political left, has been overtaken by the single value of care. But it's important to point out that it's not even quite right. This is my amendment to Jonathan's work in San Fransicko. I point out that the woke conception of care, it's not equal for everybody. It's care for the victims and not caring about the people you've defined as oppressors. But you end up very close to the Kathy Bates character in Misery. Did anybody remember Misery? I came right up to the edge. I said, in San Francisco, I sort of say, it's almost Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Munchausen syndrome by proxy is the mother who's poisoning her child in order to attract the attention and the medical care and be able to care for the child. And there's a narcissism in it too. Kathy Bates in Misery, you might remember, I'm this very special caretaker of, I think it was Robert Kahn, the actor, I can remember, right? And she was going to, James Caan. And that's sort of the picture. Jordan Peterson calls this the devouring mother archetype. He always puts up, he's got such great illustrations, he'll put up the purple octopus in the Disney movie. Which one is it? Ursula, thank you. My Disney knowledge is weak at this point. My kids are grown up. The other one, there's a chapter in my book, one of the moms who's trying to get her son off the street. He's a fentanyl addict, desperately ill. Jackie Berlin is her name. and she's very smart. Her son is very smart, very creative. And he said, "Mom, going to San Francisco, it's like Pinocchio going to Pleasure Island. Do you remember Pleasure Island in Pinocchio? That movie scared the crap out of me when I was a kid. Rightly so, right? But it did offer this lovely cautionary tale to be careful that you're not enslaved by your passions." The word addictus, addiction's root in Latin, means to enslave. That's what it means. It's always meant that. And so Corey, the son of Jackie, requires an intervention. We won't give him an intervention. Well, so what do you do about that? It's obvious. You have to show people that this is not compassionate to let schizophrenics and orphans and addicts be treated in this way. It's gotten so bad in San Francisco. You may know that the state of California decriminalized street walking with the intention of soliciting prostitution. It's called loitering with the intention of soliciting prostitution, street walking. That's why we now have in working class Latino neighborhoods in the Bay Area street walking. And it's all run by the same people. It's all MS-13, which is this sort of hybrid LA Salvadoran gang. They all run this. In fact, the sex trafficking, which is a word I really hate because I think it really drains the word of its meaning. So the pimps prostituting these girls. We were out with some private detectives who had been working with an anti-child trafficking group, and we were doing a ride along with them. And the detectives said, "Yeah, we're trying to get this 13-year-old girl off the streets." 13-year-old girl. I mean, my princess is 17, and I look askance at every boy she brings over. 13, orphan. It was one of those moments where you hear so many bad things in an evening with private detectives, private investigators, it kind of goes out one ear out the other. We then go back after a couple of weeks, and we were out again, and I just said, "What happened to the 13-year-old girl?" And they go, "Oh, yeah, thanks for reminding us. Yeah, we found her, and we called the San Francisco Police Department, and we actually went over there and told them, we got this girl, let's get her off the street." And they said, "We just don't have the staff. We don't have the people to do it, so we can't do it. Can't get her." So they lost her, and she was being pimped out by this extremely violent Salvadoran gang. She's an orphan. She's an orphan. She blamed herself for the death of one of her parents because they got into an argument and the parents got into a car accident and she died. So she blamed herself for that. So civilized societies don't allow 13-year-old orphans to be sex trafficked. It doesn't happen in civilized societies. So we, with a simmering rage, we tried to get in control. We went home that night and we emailed everybody in San Francisco government they know who we are now through my infamy. And we heard back from the assistant police chief within hours. And he said, I'm like halfway through listening to your book. We really don't need this publicity right now. And he had a daughter. He had a daughter too. So we got her off the street, happy to say. But there's no, thank you. You never really, when you write and you're in the world of ideas, it's never really sure if your work matters. So she turned 14, so to get a 14-year-old girl off the street felt really satisfying. But this is insane. This is absolute madness. I think madness is actually the right way to think about what's happening to us. San Fransicko is not a book about San Francisco per se. It's a book about the subtitle. The subtitle is this question that I became obsessed with, which is why progressives ruin cities. Why would you do this? It contradicts your own highest value that you say you care about more than any others, which is caring for victims. They're not caring for victims. So that is our line of attack on this completely depraved and immoral system. And we're starting to have some impact. We were ghettoized onto Fox News effectively from early 2020. As soon as we finished the manuscript for San Fransicko, it came out in October 2021. As soon as we finished the manuscript, I had lunch with Jackie Berlin, the mother of Corey, the fentanyl addict, and I said, would you please help us to start a movement to save your son and save the cities because it's the same thing? She said, absolutely. She started Mothers Against Drug Addictions and Death, which is now growing chapters around the country. We started California Peace Coalition with my friend Steve Burry. Steve, so people can see you, raise your hands. Steve. Discovery Institute, really important group. We've now started North America Recovers. Things are starting to happen. We knew that things were happening last year when CNN said they were going to do a documentary on San Francisco. The documentary just aired, and you guys, it's really great. It's an excellent, excellent documentary. There's so much, the propaganda around homelessness is such that the typical media story about homelessness will show somebody that's homeless. They will hide the fact that they're suffering from a serious addiction or mental illness or both. They will hide that from the readers. They will suggest it has something to do with the high cost of rent and nothing to do with the low cost and widespread availability and effective decriminalization of the drugs. That was totally different in the CNN documentary. It was clearly about the drugs. And they even got to the point in that really dark part in the middle of the documentary where they're interviewing another one of the moms whose son is is bipolar, self-medicating on very hard drugs, clean meth. And the CNN anchor says, what you're saying is that this is really happening because the activists, the ones who say they're out saving the homeless, are demanding these policies. And she said, yes, that's what it is. So very exciting moment. That was 2 weeks ago. The governor, we knew that we needed the governor to do something. The media attention wasn't enough, so I ran for governor. Why not?
Why not?
Yeah, I mean, I had a book to promote.
Right.
Totally selfish. We had a great time. It was a wonderful experience, partly because it was only 3 months that we had to do it, but that helped to elevate the issues and get some attention on it. I've been on Joe Rogan 3 times talking about it. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done, but I think people are getting to the place where they know that that intervention part, that's just the part that's missing. I think the other part that's missing, and this is more of a challenge to a more politically conservative audience, but I think it's important, is that there has to be a centralization of care to have that continuity of care. So there's really, if I just really simplify it, it's 2 things. You have to mandate the care for people who break laws because of their addiction or mental illness, and there has to be some centralized system of care. Because the typical thing is, you get arrested, maybe you'll do 72 hours in the psych ward in the hospital, you'll be released from the hospital with no place for you to go, and then you relapse and you might die. Or you get out of rehab and you go back on the street and you die. So there has to be some centralization. So we said, well, we'll just call it Cal Psych. We just need something to centralize these services. It doesn't have to be government run, it can be contracts. But they need that caseworker that I mentioned to really keep that continuity from the police station to the psych ward to the group homes. What is it really? I mean, at the end of the day, there's some folks that need to be in psychiatric wards for a little while. I would say we're somewhere between 10 and maybe 20% of the people on the streets need to be there long term. Most people just need a group home. You're a 25-year-old, you got hooked on heroin and meth or fentanyl. You need to go and do you need to do some rehab and recovery for 1 to 2 years, like at the Village of Hope that's nearby here. And then you need to have a job and reconnect with your family, and then but then you may be in a group home for a little bit longer. If you have schizophrenia like my aunt, a group home is all you need. This is not something that we're unable to do. This is not nuclear fusion, which is hard. This is basic nursing and psychiatric care for people. So all of the challenge is really around politics. And so one question would be, why have Republicans not been able to prosecute this argument, given that this is entirely on the watch of Democrats? We can't blame Republicans for any of this because Republicans have no power in California. And so why have Republicans failed to really prosecute this issue and make the case? I think it's because the voters don't trust that Republicans care. So remember, we said that care is the fundamental part of it. I think Republicans that I talk to do care a lot about stopping all of this suffering. But I don't think Republicans have really put forward a robust proposal to care, which I think is what a Cal-Psych offers. Cal-Psych offers a bunch of very clear solutions. What Western Europe is doing is what we should want. There's some differences between the Netherlands and Germany and France and Japan, but every civilized country does the same thing. What about personal freedom? What about our rights to consume substances and be intoxicated? My view is, if you want to use hard drugs in the privacy of your own home, I think that's crazy, and I'm sorry for you. But ultimately, that's not going to trigger law enforcement from our society. I just think we leave it to families to make that intervention until the person is on the street. Once they're on the street, once they're breaking laws against public camping, once they're breaking laws about public defecation, public drug use, drug dealing, sex work, those are all opportunities for intervention. The opportunities for intervention are the laws. It's the breaking of those laws. That's a moment to say, particularly if you've overdosed on the street, for the EMT to say, Michael, you've just overdosed and we've revived you on fentanyl. You've broken, we think, about 5 separate laws here. You can go to jail. My colleague, Officer Garcia here, will take you to jail and you can kick your fentanyl habit in jail, where you may or may not get Suboxone. Pretty brutal situation. Or, as a Cal-Psych worker, I see that we have rehab in Eureka available. We have rehab in Modesto, where the real estate prices are cheaper, and we can deliver these psychiatric and addiction care services for cheaper. Cal-Psych will get you on a Suboxone taper right now. Suboxone taper so that you don't have heavy withdrawal symptoms will get you into that rehab center right now as an alternative to going to jail. There's no reason we can't do that. Of course we can do that. And it's much, much cheaper to get somebody into that group home, even accounting for the number of times they'll relapse, than it is to continue to send out EMTs to revive them with Narcan every time they OD. Fire trucks, guys. Whole fire trucks are sent out to revive one addict who overdosed on. Half of all fires in Los Angeles and San Francisco are homeless encampment fires. I did a story on the homeless encampment fires. They're mostly arson. They're mostly deliberate. They're mostly revenge fires. Oh, she was sleeping with my girlfriend was sleeping with some other guy or some stupid. I mean, the pettiness of life in a homeless encampment is amazing. They're not having deep discussions there. We discovered this little pixie of a girl. I mean, she just looked like 18, 19 years old. She had infections, all over her face. She was with a guy next to her who was psychotic. And we thought they were together. We were interviewing her. How long have you known him? She just met him a couple of hours ago. That's the kind of relationships on the street. Streets are no place for any of these folks. We have to get them inside. We can do this and get them inside. Our coalition is working towards this. We're in the midst of the fight right now. I think that things are turning for us, but we definitely need a big tent and a broad coalition to succeed. Thank you guys very much. I think we said we had some time for questions, so.
We do.
Yeah, please.
Thank you so much. I sit on the board that does affordable housing for homeless veterans and low-income people throughout the state of California. And I was very skeptical about the housing first, but I've kind of come to think that it probably works, because unless you have a home where they can have a caseworker to monitor, how are you going to do it? Because before the thought was, the incentive was, if you get drug-free, then you can have housing. But if you can't get drug-free without help when you're out on the street, how do you ever get into the housing? So what are your thoughts on housing first? Because I've been torn.
Well, so Housing First is the policy we have now
Yes.
in California and all the other cities. It definitely works for some share of the population. Some share of the population can have an apartment. My schizophrenic aunt could not have. She needed to be in the group home. She needed that social environment. She would have been very bad off having her own apartment unit and being expected to take care of herself. Similarly bad off are people who have no requirement to confront their addiction. You know, when you see someone overdose on the street, everybody sees it right away, and you hear them yell out, "Narcan, Narcan." Everybody's got Narcan, they Narcan them. If you're smoking fentanyl in your apartment by yourself and you overdose, you will die. So it doesn't work in that way either. There's now been, Harvard did a study of tracking what we call sheltered homeless, homeless who are in shelters, and unsheltered homeless, which are the folks on the street in the tents. The unsheltered homeless are 3 times more likely to die than the people inside. It's impossible to properly treat people inside, so you're right about that. But the best evidence we have is this contingency approach. So everybody needs to be inside. It should be safe, clean, have some dignity in the shelter. But the privacy, that extra notch up, is something that they can earn. Because what Renee was saying, my Dutch friend, it's carrots and sticks the whole time. Losing your housing is actually just taking away the carrot. So the stick is the carrot in reverse. And we were with a woman with schizophrenia. She had her 2 kids taken away from her in a shelter in Netherlands. And she said she wanted her own private room. And Renee said, "You need to start taking your meds. You're not taking your meds." And being in the Netherlands, she got mad and she went out into the courtyard and smoked a joint. Just to complicate things even further. And I was like, is that okay to just let the schizophrenic lady smoke marijuana in the courtyard? And they were like, yeah, it's marijuana. So not all drugs are the same. But there has to be some pressure on people to improve. If they're suffering from untreated mental illness or addiction, they need that. They need that pressure. It's not me. There's no desire to punish. They just have to have that.
So we've worked with some families with homeless. And we worked with a 30-plus year psychiatric nurse from LA County Mental Health. And he explained, and I just want to know what your findings are, that the hardest people to get off the street are the mentally ill who've been out for more than 6 to 8 weeks because they don't want to take their meds anymore because the meds don't make them feel good. And they would prefer to be out and just be completely free of society, their meds and everything, no matter how crazy they are. Have you found that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think people suffering from, I would say the hardest people are people that have been on the street for 2 decades and are that are schizophrenic and addicted to meth and fentanyl. Those are the most difficult people. So you're going to start with that as the most difficult, and the easiest would be the 20-year-old kid who's been on the street for a couple of days, right? So you've got a lot of heterogeneity among that group. Part of what I like about the CalPsych concept is that any CalPsych worker can get somebody the care that they need right then. I always imagined if we became governor, you would shut down the open air drug scenes. You probably end up being able to solve the easy addicts first. I think we could go a few more years of allowing a few schizophrenics pushing grocery carts around before needing to maybe use a little bit more pressure to get them inside. But what happened is that the word homelessness did not start as a propaganda word. I mean, it's been around for 100 years. And there was always a romantic idea of it. They were bums, they were riding the rails, they were sleeping rough. There were songs, hobo songs, and it sort of starts with alcoholism. World War II was a very interesting period because homelessness disappears from the United States because it's full employment. There was a role for everybody. And then you see after World War II, there's a way I can tell the story of it being very gradual, and I can tell it with some different epics. But after World War II, you basically see greater tolerance everywhere in the United States for public drunkenness. And then, of course, the big moment we haven't even talked about is that we reduced the population of our psychiatric hospitals by about 90 to 95%. I always thought there must have been some mythology about it, because people would say things like, yeah, they just took buses and put people on the street. And I was like, that couldn't have been the case. And then I discovered it was the case, that did happen. They give people a little bit of money and... Yeah. It was Foucault, yeah. Foucault is an important villain in San Francisco for anybody who's looking to get their revenge on Foucault. So that idea that mental illness is a myth really comes out of that period of the 60s. It is still held by ACLU. It took some work to prove that in San Francisco, and it's been kind of filtered through victim ideology, and they don't want to admit it because they know it's not a mainstream view, but that is the basic idea. So if you had to kind of give this another word for victim ideology or wokeism, which came from a very good professor of psychiatry at Stanford named Keith, why am I blanking on his last name? One of the characters in my book whose names I blank. But he always says it's left libertarianism. So, when you go to Boston, and my sister and her husband are very progressive residents of Boston. She actually works in care for the indigent, and her husband's a doctor. They had a little open drug scene in a place called Mass and Cass, if you know Boston. And when you would read the coverage about it, the media coverage was different. They talked about it as an open-air drug scene. They were much more open about it, and they were much more comfortable imposing restrictions, and they were much more comfortable mandating care. California has got Big Lebowski syndrome. Do you know Big Lebowski? Take it easy, man. You like to drink Chardonnay and smoke a joint. He likes to smoke meth and fentanyl. Why are you being so uptight, man? Some of that's here, too. So again, I think it all has the same answer, which is that you need to absolutely have the confrontation that this is not care, this is not compassionate, and we have a better plan. Yeah, John.
This Republican who was in the legislature had a lot of pushback from one organization called Disability Rights California. I'd like to know if you include them in your book, and then two, I'd like your thoughts on Care Court that was just passed in the last year.
Sure. I tried to focus, the Disability Rights Coalition is the sort of main coalition that opposes any coercion to get people off the street. And their most powerful member is the ACLU. So what I did in San Francisco is I wanted to focus on ACLU because that's really where the money and muscle comes from if push comes to shove. And it was ACLU that lobbied against the governor's Care Court. But yes, they're definitely the problem. And they are also mental illness deniers, if I were to have to give it an ugly word. The governor, this is a governor who said he was going to solve homelessness in 10 years, in 1996. He's somebody that is like California politicians, he's always chasing the brass ring, he's never implementing, but we did put him under a significant amount of pressure. He felt some pressure. You have to remember the governor, what they've done is they've said this is not a statewide problem, it's a local problem. So one of the things we always try to do is to make him have to deal with it. He did come up with something called Care Courts. Yes. Do we need new ways to compel and mandate treatment on people? Absolutely. He's also now called for bringing in the National Guard and using California Highway Patrol in San Francisco. Is it going to happen? No. He's not going to make it happen. I don't think this governor is, just given who he is and his priorities. But they're all sort of starting to say the right things. I just don't have much confidence either in him or the Democratic Party, or I don't see where that change would come from. But we are in a really wild moment. I mean, the cover of the Financial Times magazine today is called San Francisco's Doom Loop. Wow. So, and it's got this picture of the, what's that building called when it's near the Transamerica, but it's also, anyway, they've created these images of the buildings in San Francisco. It looks like a post-apocalyptic scene where it's all been taken over by nature. And, they're beautiful these are fake photos. I mean, they're beautiful photos, but I actually was like, it was sort of struck me, because Financial Times, of course, is the newspaper of snobs in Britain. It struck me a little bit that they were trying to kind of sugarcoat the issue a little bit for folks. I prefer the Daily Mail, which is a tawdry tabloid, because they actually show the photos of what's happening to people on the street in all of the horror, and I find it much more honest. And I'm really opposed to this kind of sentimental or sort of romantic. It was a weird, kind of romantic. I mean, the text was fine. And it was quite a steeplechase from your question about care courts. Generally, it used to be the case that you would try to change how the media covered it, and then the politicians would respond. It's actually in this issue in California, it's actually been working somewhat differently. That we've actually been excluded from the mainstream news media, sort of ghettoized into the Murdoch media, which is Fox and the Daily Mail, and we've been happy, and New York Post, and happy to be there. That's fine. Substack and Twitter. And that's actually been enough to move the politicians. So the politicians have actually moved first, and then it's come back to the media now. The liberal media now seem to feel comfortable talking about this as a drug and mental illness problem, and a depolicing problem to some extent, as opposed to just a high rents problem. Yeah, Aaron.
You mentioned the media. I don't want to change the subject too much, but could you talk a little bit about the censorship industrial complex as it might apply to this issue or other
Sure.
issues that you've worked on?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the year I graduated from high school in 1989, I was very liberal, very progressive kid, and we were very proud of the fact that the Supreme Court upheld the right to burn flags. Do you guys remember this? Yes. We were like, wow, that's amazing. And the Republicans were against burning flags, and Democrats were for burning flags, or at least the right to burn flags. And I remember my dad, a very liberal family, and he would say, ACLU, those guys, they defended the neo-Nazis to march in Skokie, Illinois, and I just remember him being that's rough, but respect. Boy, things have changed since then. We have uncovered, since December, a significant, not just operation, but apparatus funded by the U.S. government, working with supposedly non-governmental organizations, many funded by the government, to engage in widespread censorship of constitutionally protected speech on Facebook and Twitter. We would not have known about this if Elon Musk had not bought Twitter. And I should say, I've actually criticized Elon Musk. I'm the only person of the Twitter Files journalists that criticized Elon Musk repeatedly, maybe for a little awkward meeting him in person. But I'd criticized him because his supply chains are a nightmare in terms of from Congo to China and whatnot. But really, we owe Elon Musk a great debt of gratitude for allowing us to reveal. And we did know, part of your lawsuit with the attorneys general, that Facebook was doing it. But it's it was very organized. It's often through Department of Homeland Security. You may know that last year, around now, the Department of Homeland Security proposed a disinformation governance board, which was rightly attacked by both left and right, to be fair, and they dropped it within a few weeks, because we don't regulate speech in the United States. We have a First Amendment, and I never thought, either in my early career on the left or my career now, wherever I am, I never thought I would have to defend the First Amendment, but I found myself testifying in front of Congress defending the First Amendment, as did you, Aaron. And I've learned a little bit about it, but one of the things I've learned, there's always been a debate around, is the First Amendment and free speech sort of a sacred right, we call it an inalienable right or a natural right? Is it something that you just have because you're a human being? Or is it sort of instrumental, like you need free speech to have democracy and capitalism? And I'm on team inalienable rights, personally. I'm such a loudmouth and a disagreeable person. For me, speech, it's just part of being human. Like, I wouldn't want to live if I couldn't express myself, my feelings about things. I don't think you can be a truly realized human potential, to come back to Viktor Frankl, where the talk started. I don't think you can realize your full human potential if you don't have the right to express yourself, including around controversial social and political ideals. And so, shockingly, I did feel the need to make that case for that. We have discovered a censorship industrial complex. It sort of starts in the war on terrorism. There's this wonderful concept that I've come to more and more, so simple, called the overproduction of elites by a guy named Peter Turchin. You don't have to read the book, like, you'll get it right away. Like, there's too many educated people and there's nothing for us to do, is kind of the idea of the overproduction of elites. And so we then end up kind of becoming parasites or wanting to censor each other. One of the questions we always have is like, how much of the censorship industrial complex that we've uncovered is sort of organic? Like, is it wokeism and it's just annoying hall monitor type people who they can't, they won't debate me, like literally, they will not debate me, but they want to work behind the scenes to censor me. I mean, what kind of a person? Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're like, what is wrong with you? That's a particular kind of person. It's a hall monitor person. It's like the East German Stasi people. Yeah. You ever see The Lives of Others, a beautiful film? Spying on your neighbors. Like, there's something wrong with you. It's psychopathology or something, right? Bad boundaries. And so there's some of that, but then there's also an inorganic part. It's clearly coming from, reaction to Trump in particular, 2016 and Brexit. CIA, NATO, DHS, FBI, they felt like these Trump populist Republicans, that it threatened NATO and the ability to particularly engage in a war in Ukraine. So we've seen now increasing censorship of speech on Ukraine. Facebook is openly censoring anti-war views on related to Ukraine. The head of Facebook's censorship program is a former PR officer for NATO. The person that I always had my eye on very early is a person named Renee DiResta, because she was always like the smartest person. Like, she would be these Aspen Institute talks about disinformation, which are always code for censorship. And I was like, who is that person? We discovered she came out of the CIA. So I wrote a piece called Why Renee DiResta Leads the Censorship Industry. She did not like that. I knew I had to provoke her and have a fight with her, so I criticized her in Congress and then again in Congress, and it still didn't work. I know how to be a proper pest, so I went on to Joe Rogan finally. And I try not to make any personal attacks, but I felt like I needed to get this one out there, so I called her a snob. And lo and behold, that was enough. And so she tried to get Joe to take the show down from Spotify. And of course, we had all the evidence, and so we were able to defend it. But we're in the midst of it. It's happening here. It's happening in other all the English-speaking countries, what we used to call the Five Eyes countries, because these are countries where the game is that if CIA wants to spy on Michael Shellenberger, they can't do it here, so they would get like the British or the Israelis or the Canadians to do it, and then we do it for them. It's called the Five Eyes relationship since World War II. They do that now with censorship. So there's a British think tank that's trying to get me censored, mostly just through character assassination and trying to keep me out of the news, but also to censor me on Facebook, which I am censored on. So it's ongoing. it's still here. We have to basically defund these groups. We have to defund the main group inside of the Department of Homeland Security called the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. We have to stop National Science Foundation from funding censorship organizations in different universities. Lots to do. Yeah.
Back to the homelessness and the issues there. Whenever I see a problem that isn't getting solved and it's of this magnitude, somebody's profiting from not solving it. And how can I be a caring person if I don't have victims to care for? I mean, it almost seems like they're manufacturing a supply to make people feel good for being this caring person. And I don't know if that sounds, I don't mean it to be cynical. I've been looking at this a long time. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I would just say, so if that's Munchausen syndrome by proxy, that's what that is. It's unconscious though. So I think it's important to know that everybody gets up in the morning thinking that they're doing good in the world. It's just, that's everybody. And it's important to keep that in mind about our opponents as well. Because I think that if you start thinking your opponents wake up in the morning and think they're going to do ill in the world, then you're just misunderstanding who you're dealing with. So they don't do it. They don't get up in the morning and go, I want to hurt people. That's not at all what's happening. But yes, I do think that your subconscious desire to care, and if you don't have people to care for, then and that's your identity. If you're Kathy Bates, I'm taking care of this person. So, absolutely. There was actually a book written by a homeless service provider who actually said this, that we don't really want to solve it. It's sort of self-perpetuating. So I think that's true. I keep in mind Netherlands. I keep in mind Boston. It doesn't have to be that way. People, you can care in a healthy way, and they do. And they, I keep talking about my sister and her husband. When we talk about this, they find what's happening in California appalling. So they don't see this as good care. And so I think for me, I think we're just trying to move California to be a little bit more like Boston. I chose Amsterdam in the book in part because I think Amsterdam is perceived as such a liberal city, and I felt like it was something that San Franciscans might imagine that they would want to be more like, rather than choosing San Antonio or Miami or something like that. And it did make a difference. The mayor of San Francisco now has been to Amsterdam, and she met with my friend, so we'll see. Yeah.
Now, I have a friend who was a former heroin addict living on the streets, now has a great life, married, has children. But one thing he talked about was the allure and the thrill of living on the streets. Can you explain that? That it's almost like exciting to be doing that.
Yeah, and part of that is old. There's I mentioned the riding the rails or sleeping rough, and you can see it in those really great hobo songs from the 20s.
Yeah.
There was this movement, an anarchist movement, that really starts in San Francisco, California, called the International Workers of the World, or the IWW, the Wobblies. Anarchist movement. It's a very romantic movement. They wanted to defend that. And so, yeah, the city becomes kind of a playground, especially if you're drinking or you're on meth and you're with friends. So, yeah, I think that's very important. That's Pleasure Island for Corey, who's on the street. So, yeah, the society just has to say we're not going to allow that.
Yeah.
You can be on the streets, and you can even be intoxicated on the streets, but you can't sleep on the streets. You can't have a tent on the streets. You got to come inside because it's not safe for you to be outside. It's not safe for anybody else to have you on the street, so you got to come inside. And I would note that picture of coming inside is probably a good place to start. The new mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, her program, because they all have their new program, hers is called Inside Safe. And she's responding a bit to her rival, who she defeated in November, who also was campaigning on getting people inside. So I think we're starting to make some of that progress. But yeah, you've got to that's neat that it was romantic for you, but
Yeah.
we're not going to be able to have a city that way. We can't protect our citizens that way. Yeah.
There's another piece of this that I'm remembering the night we had dinner, it's probably 2 years ago now, with Jim Palmer, who you didn't get to meet today, who is ill, and who I certainly hope will recover, who was in the director of this Village of Hope for 20, 30 years now. He told us that the ACLU had brought a case in Boise, Idaho, of a homeless man who was mandated into a shelter, and it was run by Christians. And there was either a picture of Jesus, a Bible verse, something in the place, and he objected, was clearly set up, that his First Amendment freedom of religion was violated by being sent to this evil place. They won the case, and in the, what circuit are we in, Howard? The Ninth Circuit, no city, entity, whatever, can mandate someone to go to a shelter run by Christians or Jews or Buddhists. It tends to be the Christians who run them because it's a deep thing in Christianity to care for, as Jim Palmer would say, the least, the last, and the lost. And so Jim Palmer, his phone lit up. The city of Tustin, he had been a city councilman there at one point, called him up and said, "What are we going to do now? We can't send him to you." And he said, "You have to open a shelter. You have to open a shelter for us." And Jim said, "Well, the thing is, I'll do it, but they can't have their alcohol and their drugs in it if I'm going to run it." And so they said, "Fine, whatever you want." Just so he set one up. To me, that was oppression of religion. That Christians can't serve the poor because they're Christians, and also because they believe that perhaps something that might help you would be faith in Jesus Christ, which you can take or leave. In my experience of these places, they don't make you, but they offer that to you as something you might consider in your life. I'm a Christian, so I'm hopeless. But I don't, I have lots of friends who aren't. And they know who I am, I know who they are. I love them dearly. I pray for them. They also get nervous if I don't pray before dinner. I don't know what the problem is. But anyway, it's my atheist friends who say, "Aren't you going to pray?" I said, "What's it to you?" Anyway, it's great. Two of my best friends. Anyway, never mind. But it seemed to me that, the ACLU is another example, but it basically shut down or shut off the ability of Christian organizations to care, who don't, in my experience, and I've been to quite a few, it's not, you can't have dinner if you don't believe in Jesus. It's not that. Anyway, have you come across that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that so I don't know if everybody heard the question, but it's sort of that, in a variety of ways, we have not allowed for faith-based service organizations to serve.
Yeah.
And I think there's something else going on, which is just that when I look at the rise of what we call wokeism or victimhood ideology, it is serving the role of a religion for its strongest adherents. So we wrote an essay called "Why Wokeism is a Religion," because my friend John McWhorter wrote a book called "Woke Racism" that was inspired by him annoyed at the patronizing way and the infantilization of Black Americans in particular. And he described it as a religion, and I wrote a bunch of religious categories across the top of my notebook, and then on the horizontal axis, and then on the vertical axis I did race, climate change, homelessness, and I went down all these progressive issues, and I was able to fill out these categories very well. We created something called a taxonomy of woke religion. This has been where I think all my writing has gone. My last two books were basically arguing that apocalyptic environmentalism and wokeism are both dominant secular religions that are providing psychological comfort for people that have abandoned traditional faiths. And it's dangerous in the sense that they don't have any self-awareness about it. So you just said you're a Christian, or I might say I'm a Christian, or someone's a Buddhist, and then you would say, I'm a Christian and my politics are, center right or center left or whatever it would be. People that are really woke, they don't think that they are in the grip of a religion. And so I think we said that before, this conscious unconscious part, they're operating and using language in an absolutely religious way, to the point where, you can go too far, but if you were to really look at it, you're sacrificing your victims on the street, and you're sort of putting them on display for your religion. And there's a quality of it that's sort of, there's a former San Francisco VA psychiatrist who read San Francisco, and he wrote me this long email. And he was like, there was always a sense when we were trying to get people off the street, and there was these so-called homeless advocates demanding that they be left on the streets. There was always the sense, he said, that they were saying F you to the system. That this proved that capitalism is barbaric by having these people on the streets, so that people were being used. But again, I'm not suggesting that they ever had a meeting where they said, we're going to leave people on the street. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying, you look at Jordan Peterson has this great quote, which is, if you're not sure what someone's motivations are, look at the consequences of their actions. Well, the consequences of these actions are that you have all these people victimized on the streets, and they're actively resisting this particular. It's one of the funniest experiences is, like, for me, the central villain in San Francisco, alongside Foucault, is a person named Jennifer Friedenbach, who's the head of the San Francisco Coalition on Homelessness. I think she makes like $40,000 a year. So there's a homeless industrial complex for sure, but she's definitely not in it for the money. But she's a master of language. If you can see the CNN documentary, it's really worth seeing, because she's sort of one of the main characters in it. She's a master at using language to rationalize and justify these things. But I thought one of the most telling moments is that the city was trying to shut down an open-air drug scene. There was a pregnant woman that they were trying to get into care, and they were trying to block the police and social workers from shutting down the open-air drug scene. You may know, in terms of horror stories, there's a pregnant woman just gave birth on the sidewalk in San Francisco a couple of weeks ago, and another woman didn't know she was pregnant, but then had a stillborn birth in one of the outhouses near the open-air drug scene. So, this is where we're at.
One last question.
Sure, please.
Anybody?
Yeah.
In addition to Roberta's comment, to take the politics out of this issue seems impossible because of the religious nature, that maybe that's what the threat is with Christian or faith-based groups coming in to try to take care of homelessness. We're taking away the victims that political party platform wants to take care of. And if you say, well, they might not mean to enable, it's all about their policies and show how much they're saving, that they've lost track of the victim. I don't know how we start shifting the voting to say these policies are hurtful, they're enabling, they're killing people, they're affecting our life here in the state, they're expensive. They're kind of just a loser approach to this. How do we get voters to start saying to the leaders that we don't want to support your religion, in a sense?
Yeah. This gets at, I think one of the outcomes, this was going to be I was working on a third book and I abandoned it because I'm tired. I did 2 books in a row, 2 years in a row. But the third book was about this problem of secularism and then people needing to construct alternative religions as a reaction to what philosophers called nihilism, which is both the idea that life has no meaning, and also that given that it has no meaning, then it's really all about either hedonism or the pursuit of power as a kind of hedonism. So that's what you're getting. That's what Jennifer Friedenbach, she doesn't get it in money, she gets it in power. She controls the city budget on homelessness. So it's about power fundamentally. I think we need clearly some sort of new political formation that directly confronts the care issue. I think it's fine if it's Republicans. I ran as an independent. Identity is, particularly in moments of a lot of confusion, identity is something everyone's really obsessed with right now. We're not, left and right don't seem to explain a lot of these new political identities. So on the one hand, that's an opportunity to construct some new identities. We've been talking about ourselves increasingly in the language of recovery, of wanting to empower people and not deprive them of agency by describing them as inherently victims doomed to that reality, but people that are capable of improving their lives, certainly with our help as a society. And that's why we named it Recovery. We had a big, spent a fair amount, as you might imagine, with coalitions, you spend a lot of time trying to figure out what the name is. But we do find that recovery is, I think, a really powerful word to describe both the individual process but also the society-wide process, and to describe what our opponents are doing as enabling. So these words that we end up using, actually, they come right out of the therapeutic context. So in terms of politics, clearly we need a new political formation that's going to be able to pull moderate Democrats away from the radical left. What we have on our side is that a large majority do support these policies. Somewhere between 70 to 80% support the policy agenda that I'm describing. And that's across multiple polls. San Francisco, 75% want to see mandated treatment to people on the street. So we have a lot going for us in terms of an agenda, in terms of a coalition, even in some of the language, but I do think you're right, that there's something still missing from the political party level of politics. Wow. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for a very reasoned and calm presentation of horrific material. It was really helpful. It was light in that heat, and I think that that's probably one way you're going to be more and more, and let us pray, successful. So thank you all for coming tonight. I think it's been, well, it's not good news, but it's wonderful. And also some hopeful things there. I want to tell you what's coming up. On the 15th, 16th, and 17th of June, if you don't have tickets, try to get them, for the world premiere of Fiat Lux, a new oratorio by Sir James Macmillan with a libretto by Dana Gioia. You've seen some of these people here. Dana Gioia, if you've been here, you've seen him. And it's being performed by the Pacific Symphony. It was commissioned by me and Howard. And it is, it's Let There Be Light. So it's the Cathedrals of Sound for the Pacific Symphony. And on the 18th of June, James Macmillan, Dana Gioia, and Carl St. Clair, the artistic director of the Pacific Symphony, will be here for a salon to talk about how do you put an oratorio together, why do you put an oratorio together in 2023, who cares about oratorios, and why are you still doing this? And I think that it'll be a fruitful conversation. Because it's cheaper than opera. There you are. Howard is always ready with the answer. Anyway, and we're excited because Sir James Macmillan is going from strength to strength. If you look at what he's doing, he's all over the planet, actually, conducting and doing work. And Dana's not doing bad either. So there you are. On the 25th of June, the following Sunday, because people are here, there will be the kind of formal opening of the show that's been up all spring of Maya Lisa's 8 Days of Creation paintings, which are in the gallery. And Maya Lisa will be here. There will be, I believe, a film that Maya has done, and then Timothy Verdon, Monsignor Timothy Verdon, who is the director of the Duomo Museum in Florence, Italy, which is the museum of all the art connected to all the buildings that the Catholic Church owns in Florence. And if you know even a little bit about it, you know that's a heck of a lot of buildings. At any rate, he is eloquent, and he will be speaking as well as the film that Maya has done. And then you're like free for the summer because I'm going away. Anyway, I'm going away to edit my book. So, because if I stay here, it will never get done. So anyway, on August 27, the media project, which we support, which does several things, one of which, if you haven't seen it, it does Religion Unplugged, which is an online news magazine that covers religion all over the world. And our board members will be here, and they are 2 people from India, one of whom was kind of the Barbara Walters, for those of you who are old enough to remember Barbara Walters, of Indian television. She was the founding director of an independent news station in Chennai, and she interviewed all mega people all over South Asia. She is one of our board members. She will be here. And also another Indian, Vishal Arora, who is a video journalist who's worked for various and sundry publications. Another of our board members is from Nigeria, where he was the editor and then the publisher of the Guardian in Lagos, and is now doing independent work, starting a radio station. Another of our board members is German. I'm telling you this because they're pretty interesting people. Marcus Speaker covered Angela Merkel for 10 years for one of the major German news outlets. He will be here, and also Ronaldo Aragon, who is a TV news presenter in Lima, Peru. So it's a wide variety of humans, plus Jody Hassett-Sanchez, who was the person who, she worked for CNN for 15 years, and then she was the producer for the religion and arts and culture reporting for the evening news with Peter Jennings until she left that to become an independent filmmaker and has done a number of films. She's also one of our board members. So, and the other one is Paul Marshall, who's an international expert on religious freedom, and he's written, I lose track how many books, 20 at least. At any rate, so the board members will all be here. There will be a presentation about what the media project is, and also those people who live in rather interesting places in the world. And you can ask them questions. And as you know, India's facing a lot of issues because of Hindutva. And our friends are knowledgeable about that. I think we might not be able to record what they say because they would not want it to come back to bite them. The others don't have that so much. So anyway, that will happen on August 27. On the 17th of September, Matthew Milliner and Jeremy Begbie will be here. We're doing the arts again. But Matthew Milliner is going to give a talk out of his book, The Mother of the Lamb. And Jeremy Begbie will give a presentation on the importance of music and probably play the piano as part of it. And on October 21st, there is a salon that it has to do with the work that I've been doing and the tour we took, what I call the New Jerusalem tour, which is last summer we took 7 college presidents and their spouses, along with some other nefarious people, on a 2-week tour of the history of Christianity through art and architecture from Jerusalem to London. Everyone survived. 2 people got COVID, but they got over it. At any rate, and there will be, on the 21st, there will be a film done by Jody Hassett-Sanchez of that trip and what it meant. And then there will be a spoken word concert put together by a rapper who was on the trip with us named Street. And Street is putting together a spoken word concert to have. And there will be the show of Kieran Dodds, who is a pretty internationally acclaimed photographer. His photographs of the trip will be the art show in the gallery. So, and then we get back to something pertinent to America, I guess, in a different way. Roosevelt Montas will be here to talk about education. Roosevelt Montas is from the Dominican Republic. His parents came to America. It's another person I listen to on Andrew Sullivan. But then he went to Columbia and did, as you know, they still have that great book curriculum, which they tried to get rid of, but the alums all scream too much, and so they keep it. And then he went on to become the director of that program eventually. And he has written a book about, I forget what the title, I think it has Homer in the title. But anyway, he'll be talking about the importance of great books education. So, in a positive way. So, that's what's coming up. And I just thought I'd say all that. Put it on your schedule. And so, once again, I want to thank Michael. This was marvelous. Thank you. So, be safe, okay? Bye.